Let us pray. O God, take my lips and speak through them. Take our minds and think through them. Take our hands and use them. Take our hearts and set them on fire for you. Amen. A minister whom I will call Betty told me that she and her younger sister had two things in common as they grew into adulthood. The first was their knowledge of all the Bible stories learned as children. And the second was their shared hope of becoming grand fashionistas. One day, Betty surprised her younger sister appearing at her door not only resplendent in the perfect outfit, but her face was also framed with a stunning new hair color and cut. Opening the door in amazement, the younger sister shouted out delighted, "Moses!" Betty, as radiant and shining as Moses in our lesson today, nearly needing a veil. What makes you radiant? I don't mean sunburned, and I don't mean like a movie star having just the right makeup for the red carpet. And I don't even mean gallant and regal, but radiant in the way that Moses is when he comes down from the mountains, where he has been with God for 40 days. It's not a conscious, preening radiance. Moses, you see, isn't even aware of how he looks at first. But the people see his shining face, and they instantly know he has changed. His face shines, it glows. What or who has made you radiant? So alive, so centered, that people can see it in you. When was the last time that you felt that way, glowing really from the inside out? Your face perhaps reflecting some greater glory that you had been steeped in, soaking up, and now you're reflecting back at others. What would give the people here of King's Chapel a reputation for being radiantly alive? Evelyn Danforth, sister to our Julie Hyde and Nina Danforth, was one person who had this radiance. During the times that I met her at the very end of her life, and others say it shone from her all her life long. You see, she was aglow in love and kindness. She was gentle and thankful. You would see her face all lit up and find your own face softening, your own lips curving to a smile. Lynn died in August, and her memorial service will be here on Saturday this week, right after Thanksgiving. You all are invited. And that timing seems just right, because part of Lynn's radiance, perhaps its genesis, seemed rooted in gratitude. Thanksgiving makes sense. This is the family prayer that will be said at Lynn's service, written by her uncle and our former minister, Paul Free Perkins. We give thee unfeigned thanks, O God, our Father, for this family and for our part in its enduring and ongoing life. Help us to know it, to cherish it, and to live in it as a beloved community of memory and hope. Thou who hast given us so much, give us one gift more, a grateful heart. Writer Anne Lamott recently published a very slim volume entitled Help, Thanks, Wow. These three words, help, thanks, wow, are the three essential prayers according to Anne Lamott. She loves beautifully crafted prayers like those in our prayer book. But when she's a bit too frantic to remember the prayer for all sorts and conditions of mankind, she says, help, or perhaps, according to her, help me be less of a jerk. When the general thanksgiving in its full form won't come to your lips, say thanks. And if you forget the order in which all the works of the Lord praise him, frost and cold before mountains and hills, then wow can get you started. Wow, God, you are amazing. But this week I felt time was short, even for 3 little prayers, help, thanks, and wow. And since it's the weekend before Thanksgiving, I decided to skip right into the middle of the book, 2nd chapter on thanks, breezing past that 1st chapter asking for help. I already knew my sermon thesis. Here it is, in case you want to doze off for 10 more minutes. I would want you to know, choose to live in gratitude rather than fear, because grateful lives are radiant and generous. And I do believe that, and of course, I didn't need any help with the sermon. Jumped right to thanks. But this maxim, to choose to live in gratitude rather than fear, even though it is true, was a little too simplistic for my real life and probably yours. Because it's not so easy to simply switch our perspective, like those machines that an ophthalmologist puts over our eyes, switching one lens for another, flip, out with fear, flip, in with thanks, as if all we need is a better attitude. So if you find yourself drowning in fear, needing help, you're to blame. Snap out of it. Count your blessings. I would never say only get a grip to one who just lost their loved one. Would never say just buck up to one heartsick over their unending addiction or their child's. Would never blame someone who lost her job and apartment after getting sick, as if all they needed was mental toughness. And Jesus has an annoying habit of suggesting that all of us, me and you, have some role to play in the lives of those who are sick or grieving, hungry or thirsty, lonely and jailed, because that's where we'll find him, he says. So I started at the beginning because Anne Lamott's 2nd chapter on thanks only makes sense after her 1st chapter about asking for help from God. Because after you read the morning news about ISIL or immigration, or when you contrast your own family last Thanksgiving with that Norman Rockwell painting, or when you wake up at 4 a.m. and feel so lonely in the darkness, it's not easy to leap right into thanks. And Lamott suggests good, honest prayers for help. Most good, honest prayers for help, she writes, remind me that I'm not in charge, that I cannot fix anything, and that I open myself to being helped by some force, some friends, some something. These prayers say, dear something, I don't know what I'm doing. I can't see where I'm going. I'm getting more lost, more afraid, more clenched. Help. While I am not going to limp, she says, I am not going to go limp, she says, I'm asking for the willingness to step into the truth. Lamont uses what she calls a God box. Everything from her car's glove container to decorative boxes. They have to be real so you can physically put a note in it, so that you can see yourself letting go and asking for help. Otherwise, we don't. So she writes down the name of the person who angers her or worries her and the situation that she's obsessing about, just thinking about, and can't get out of her mind. And she puts that in the box and closes it. Perhaps, suggests Lamont, with a brief moment of prayer that might come out sounding something like this. Here, you think you are so big? Fine, you deal with it. Although I have a few more excellent ideas on how best to proceed, God. And then she agrees to keep her sticky mitts off the spaceship until she hears back. Quote, the response probably won't be from God in the sense of hearing a deep grandfatherly voice or via skywriting or in the form of an LED-lit airplane aisle at your feet, but the mail will come, or an email, or the phone will ring. Unfortunately, it may not be later today, ideally right after lunch, but you will hear back. You will come to know. Maybe after you put a note in the God box, she says, you'll go a little limp. And in that divine limpness, you'll be able to breathe again. Then you're halfway home. Because when we cry out for help or whisper it into our chests, we enter the paradox of not going limp, not feeling so helpless that we can barely walk, and we release ourselves from the absolute craziness of trying to be our own and other people's higher powers. It's like the old riddle, she says, what's the difference between you and God? God never thinks he's you. So in asking for help, we open ourselves to noticing the help around us. Asking for help from God, says Lamont, may be one of those miracles where your heart sinks because you think it means you've lost. But in surrender, you've won, and if it were me, after a moment, she says, I would say thanks. This is my theory of why Moses' face was radiant when he came down from Mount Sinai. He'd said help enough times and discovered help, and said thanks enough times in knee-bending, stunned gratitude that he's lived into the glow of wow. That pattern of help and thanks sank deeply inside him, so deep it glowed out from him. He wasn't really different from us, you see. He hadn't started out radiant. Before the radiance, there was a lot of despair and fury and long desert miles, remember? Moses, who doesn't want the job. Can't I just stay here, God, and tend sheep, something I know I'm good at? Moses, unfit to lead. I stutter, God, no one will trust me, but God presses on. I can use you. I can speak through you. I can give you the help you need. Moses, completely ineffectual, going to the mighty king of Egypt, making that audacious claim, God doesn't want us to be slaves. Right, says Pharaoh. All those plagues and no change. But God says, keep on, and then one night, the people flee for their lives so suddenly that they don't have time for the bread to rise, the Exodus. Remembered each year in the Passover Seder, we were once strangers in a strange land, but God freed us. This fall, we've been on the journey together, traveling with the ancient Hebrews into their new life, wondering with them, how will we cross the turbulent waters of our Red Seas? How will we find bread in the wilderness when we're hungry and water when we're thirsty? The people keep forgetting that God helped last time, and so will again, because it's hard to remember how thankful we were for that last blessing when a new fear overtakes us. Then Moses climbs up the mountain to get the 10 Commandments, but the people are without a leader so long that they give up and build themselves a golden calf to worship, pouring all their monies and all their gold into a structure they can see, a visible balance sheet of what they own. And that gives them courage. But Moses, when he comes down in a fury, hurls the tablets of commandments away. Moses and God and the people wrestle together until God says, I will never abandon you. Climb the mountain again, Moses. I'll give you new tablets. And this time, Moses returns radiant. Moses gets to wow. Wow, says Lamont. Wow, that God keeps giving and forgiving and inviting us back. God has no common sense. Quote, God doesn't say, I have had it this time, you have taken the course 4 times and you flunked again, what a joke. No, wow. We get to keep starting over. So the Hebrews journey on together away from that mountain and toward the promised land as we do. Because the wilderness is not meant to be our final home. Could you be radiant with Thanksgiving? Radiant when kids who seemed estranged start spending time with us again in the summer. Radiant when out of the blue we find a way to sort out the next step on our journey. Radiant when we find a way to forgive that we thought could never happen. Radiant when a job comes through. Radiant when one assistant minister cannot come, but just the right other says yes. Radiant and thankful generous. Because from gratitude flows generosity, doesn't it? Once we're thankful for what we have, then we want to share it, however we can. After the service, you're invited to stay and talk about this church's journey. Let's begin by asking for God's help, that we do God's will in this city at this time. Let's breathe in God's spirit of hope and love, watching for the ways in which help arrives, maybe on paths unexpected. Let's give thanks for all God has already done in our lives so that we grow to live in wow, radiating out welcoming love to all who enters those doors. And then when we leave this place, acting in love, becoming the help for which others are praying. For there we will find God.